I think that we should go ahead and get started. Again, there's a link that Joseph just posted in the chat for a sign-in. And it will just help us get a sense of who has attended and who joined us today. And then Paul also has thrown our social media info in the chat as well. So be sure to check us out on social media, give us a follow. We have some pretty sweet memes coming out these days, thanks to Paul. So we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for attending. I see some people are trickling in. That's a great time. Hello, those who are just tuning in. We're just about to get started, so your timing is perfect. And if I can request that everyone mute themselves until we get to the discussion point so that everyone, we can hear the speakers clearly, that would be a huge help. And for those who just tuned in, there's a sign-up sheet, a link to a doc in the chat, and so if you can sign in there, that would be really helpful for us. So thank you all for attending today's meeting. My name is Rhea, and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative in New York City. I'm a member of the Queens branch. And we are here today to discuss the very important question and the name of today's event surrounding the question of what should Bernie supporters do now? There are currently millions of Bernie supporters and volunteers who are now sort of left without a clear direction on where to put our energy. And with a multitude of crises that working people are currently facing, this pandemic being one of the latest ones, the call for a fighting way forward is very much needed. And though it's at somewhat of a crossroads, the movement's desire to fight is still very strong, as we're seeing in many different ways across the country, on the left in particular. And we are faced with a number of questions, a few of which were in the description of today's Facebook event, but I will share those now just to sort of warm us up. Questions like, should Bernie supporters vote and mobilize to vote for Biden, or should we support a third-party independent candidate? Is the Democratic Party reformable into a progressive People's Party, or do we need to #DemExit and build a new working class party? Where do we put our energy now and going forward? So to jumpstart us into these questions, we have three speakers with us today who I am delighted to introduce you all to. We have Algier Hawkins with us, who is an organizer and a member of Socialist Alternative, and who has been an organizer and member for 25 years. Very happy to have him speaking for us today. In a little bit, we'll also be joined by Zohran Mamdani, who is a Democratic Socialist candidate running for the New York State Assembly in Astoria. Thrilled to have him come and chat with us as well. And we're also joined by Daniel Lynch, who is an organizer and member of the Queens chapter of DSA, of Democratic Socialists of America. So we have a really great lineup, and I'm thrilled to hear their discussion contributions. So we will hear from our three speakers, and then we'll open up the room we're all in together virtually, to a discussion for about 30 minutes for comments, for questions. After that, we'll hear briefly from Joseph, who is also a member of Socialist Alternative, on SA's newspaper publication. And then we will hear again from Daniel and Algier, who will sum up the discussion that we've had and conclude our meeting. We're going to aim to end about 3:30 so people can go enjoy the sunshine. And just as a reminder, if you have just tuned in, there is a sign up sheet in the chat. So please be sure to put your information down so that we know that you have joined us and we can keep in touch with you. Um, and I believe that we have control over the microphones, but just in case we don't, I just kindly request that we mute ourselves while the speakers are speaking to avoid unnecessary noise and distraction. So without further ado, Algier, we'll begin with you if you're all set to go. And how would you like your timekeeping? How would you like me to let you know?
If you can give me at 19 minutes,
Sure,
that'd be good.
absolutely. Whenever you're ready. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Well, before I begin, I have my daughter with me, so me and her will be doing a Steph Curry, Riley Curry imitation of the NBA Finals from a few years ago. So if you if you think I'm a little distracted, it's because of baby girl. Hello, sisters and brothers. We are definitely living in a distinct period of world history. Before the emergence of the new Great Depression and COVID-19, for the majority of working people, the poor, the most oppressed, during normal times, we were facing increasing levels of debt, poverty, income inequality, law enforcement violence, sexual violence, the greater dictatorship of the bosses in the workplace, and the climate crisis. This is as 8 billionaires have more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population. Um, at the same time, we've witnessed and participating in the developing socialist movement, while at the same time we are observing the fact that there's a lack of militant leadership from our trade unions and from our social justice organizations, let alone not even having our own political weapon to challenge big business, its agenda, and its parties, the Democrats and Republicans. What has emerged and what began in 2016, a pulse reader arrived on the scene. Bernie Sanders' campaigns of 2016 and 2020 pose a very fundamental question, and that is, if we live in a democratic society, a civilized society, um, albeit running inside the Democratic Party, to which we had disagreed with him on, a society that should provide the most basic necessities of healthcare, of housing, of education. He punctuated the question of a political revolution. Um, he highlighted the he posed the question of should billionaires exist, and his campaign slogan, "Not me, us." He was able to talk to the so-called divide that exists in American society. He was able to talk to the Trump supporter. He was able to talk to the independent, and he was able to talk to the Democratic Party supporter. He spoke to young people in particular, and his message, his program, and his approach, his overall approach, really resonated with a whole new generation that basically have lived under neoliberal capitalism for the past 40 years. But to usher a Sanders program, to usher a Sanders message, the building of a new reality would take more than electing progressives, particularly from the Democratic Party. It would mean seeing politics from a working class grassroots perspective, rebuilding our organizations, social movements, our unions as bodies, as instruments of class struggle against the agenda of Wall Street, with the vision of building our own political party. Bernie's decision to stand down and end his presidential run was a body blow to his supporters, uh, that he attempts today, and this is tragic actually, that he attempts today to shame and even bully to support Joe Blacker than Black Biden, the prince of neoliberalism, uh, that has angered millions of his supporters who gave every inch of themselves to build the strongest possible force to enact the change that we need in our society. So we must pose some questions, and we must answer those questions in the affirmative. Was the defeat a question of poor organizing? Absolutely not. Did Bernie lose fair and square? Hell no. And what was it an undemocratic sabotage by the party's establishment? Hell yes. Bernie's program challenged the neoliberal paradigm, and that makes Bernie's capitulation to the Democratic Party establishment and political and economic ruling elite. In this period of historical crisis for global US capitalism, millions are asking the questions around the system and the morals of this system, and the need for a sustained, organized fight back in the workplaces, in the communities, in the universities. It makes this capitulation even a greater total disgrace of the highest order. Bernie has put his political capital in the bank of the Democratic Party to confront this moment and to defeat Trump. As the forces of right-wing populism grows, and both parties are preparing a pandemic version of disaster capitalism with austerity budgets, layoffs, and open attack on the working class, the poor, and the most oppressed to put their crisis on our lives. We must stand against the tsunami of lesser evilism and give no support for Biden. The building of social movements that will lay down the groundwork of a party of the working class and poor is urgently needed. 2016 and 2020, Sanders did not lose, but what we saw concretely, the full weight of the system block him at every stage. With the pandemic destroying our communities, demands like Medicare for all, and we know that this system puts profits first and foremost than the health and well-being of its citizens. The demand for Medicare for all is even more vital, and we must fully understand the forces we are up against. As Biden said a couple weeks ago, and he doubled down on it just recently, he would not vote, or he would not sign a bill that has a Medicare for all stamp on it. The building of an independent working class movement for healthcare is vital for us to win socialized medicine in this society. Some would argue that someone like Sanders can take over the Democratic Party the same way that Trump did with the Republicans. But there's a fundamental difference to that paradigm. But while Trump was able to force the Republican establishment to retreat and remake the party in his own image, this has not been the case for the left inside the Democratic Party. At a fundamental level, the stakes were higher with Sanders inside the Democratic Party. Trump, despite his boorish behavior, his populist rhetoric, his open, naked racism and anti-immigrant racism and xenophobia, his erratic, unstable mood swings, does not threaten the corporate element and the corporate agenda of the Republican Party. Since he took office, CEOs have been quite supportive of his tax cuts for the rich and his attacks on environmental regulation, as well as generally backing his tough line on China. The Sanders program and approach, on the other hand, was seen as a direct threat to the corporate character and the interests that dominates the Democratic Party. So what is posed to us today? We must take the baton from Sanders and finish the race and the struggle to win his program. The politics we need is to give organized expression to the genuine support of millions for Sanders' platform, to which he articulated. It becomes more necessary with each passing day, with the new Great Depression and the pandemic. It is the coming social upheaval in US society that will lay the foundations for a new party of the working class and poor. We must prepare for historic developments in social struggle around housing, around healthcare, around workplace democracy, and the development of union organizing. the struggle against budget cuts, and the struggle for jobs. The people who supported Bernie's campaign are now angry at his decision to back Biden. And they should promote and support the strongest protest vote in 2020, opposing Trump and Joe Biden, to help prepare and build those struggles that are forthcoming and lay down the groundwork for a new mass party of the working class and poor, while we strengthen, and I think this is the most crucial part to this, while we strengthen the forces of socialism that will articulate the need for true, genuine workers' democracy, not only in this country, but around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Algier, for that lead off into the discussion. I think it's important to highlight what you said about Bernie supporters taking the baton and finishing the race through struggle, and giving organized expression to the anger of supporters at Bernie for backing Biden, as well as to the energy that his campaign really galvanized and helped to foster and encourage, and that bringing that organization into our workplaces is and social movements is really where that anger and energy needs to be drawn. So I just wanted to highlight that, and thank you for that. So we I think are going to go to Daniel Lynch next. He is, for those who maybe tuned in during Algier's lead off, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Daniel Lynch is an organizer and member of the Queens chapter of DSA. And we're really happy to have him join the discussion. And also, if you've just joined in, if you could pretty please sign in on our sheet that Joseph has posted in the chat. We would appreciate that so much. So Daniel, thank you for jumping on one slot earlier, and we're happy to have you. How would you like your time kept? Every 5 minutes?
Yeah, that works for me. You can hit me in the message. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for inviting me here. It's great to meet you and speak to you all today. I'm Daniel. As we said, I'm in the Queens branch of DSA. I'm active in a few working groups, though, I guess beyond Queens. I'm in the electoral working groups. I participate a bit in Queens, in Brooklyn, and the Bronx Upper Manhattan groups. I'm marginally involved in the media working group, a little bit in eco-socialist and some other groups. I guess I would start off by probably apologizing to you. I'm not the most strategic-minded person who speaks for DSA, in the sense that I really don't have an answer around Dem exits or a dirty break or what is the strategy around the presidential election. In fact, I don't think about it a lot living in New York, principally because I think if you go a level down from that strategy of deciding what we do in regards to national politics and parties, I think that there is a tactical, or even you could call it like a local strategy, where we have a more immediate task ahead of us. And I think one thing that's been really exciting for us the past few years is the ability to engage some of these people who've been radicalized by the Bernie 2016 or the 2020 campaigns or some of our other campaigns, and then to bring them into this fight. So, the typical organizer circles, right? So like, how do you make a voter a left voter? How do you make a left voter someone who's going to canvass? How do you make someone who's going to canvass a good canvasser? How do you make them an organizer that can attract more canvassers? And I think especially now, when you look at the folks who, I think you see a lot of folks who got involved in Bernie who have a certain type of anti-establishment politics, or they know that something's wrong, but they don't really have a framework for viewing why they're wrong. And now is a wonderful time for organizations like ours to engage them and give them an ideological framework with which to regard society, and not simply look at it as, they like Bernie and they dislike whatever Buttigieg or Biden or whatever, for whatever inchoate reasons they can't quite that they can't quite summarize easily, and to give them in both, I guess, again, an ideological framework with which to engage in these decisions, and then also the capacity to actually do stuff, right? The whole practice theory thing, right? Where we have been having some luck just to sort of exchange a little bit of ideas between the organizations. I think we've collaborated on these before, is I really believe in these local elections over the next few years. It's an excellent field with which to engage folks. I mean, for a number of reasons. I think I recognize a lot of you from when we were all canvassing together for Julia Salazar. And I think it was like a beautiful experience. A lot of you were showing up there, and a lot of DSA members, and a lot of, just, let's be frank, random people who had never done this before. They were very excited coming off the back of the Ocasio win, and then they were coming to canvass for Julia. And as fun as Bernie was, I went on a few Bernie journeys, and I worked a little bit in the Bernie IE here in New York. A local race like this, I think, gives people an opportunity to do a few things. Namely, it gives you like agency to actually have, now, of course, when you're organizing together, we were all organizing very hard for Bernie. I think people did very effective work, but your ability to influence the outcome per se is not the same as in a local race, right? Like, I think we were aiming to get, we ended up getting like 20,000 something votes, but we were aiming to get like 7,000 IDs or something like that for Julia, or maybe it was 8,500. But like a single person who really was enamored with this project and would go out like 3 or 4 times a day, may be responsible for like 5% of the ID goal at the end of a campaign, which is giving someone an agency to do something that you certainly can't see in like the presidential field. Additionally, I think there's a lot less reasons to become cynical. I think we saw the way a lot of the media and the party were able to coalesce around stopping Bernie, which, if you remember 2018 and some of the articles written about Julia, just did not work at all. And it was, I would say, I mean, I don't know the math, but there have probably been tens of thousands of state assembly, House, and Senate candidates since the 1700s. And I would wager that that race probably garnered 40% of the total coverage, right, in the history of state and local races, and they still couldn't outdo all of us going out and knocking on these doors. So I think engaging again these folks to be involved in these, and not just races, because I can talk a little bit, just if you all want to hear a little bit about what we're doing in COVID outside of electoral work too. But I think the principal challenge right now is to find people who are involved in Bernie and to get them plugged into either one of these electoral or non-electoral local campaigns where they can feel that they have agency in what they're doing, that what they're doing matters, where there's a very forgiving and easy environment for them to grow in, both ideologically and as an organizer, which is a great thing about some of these massive sort of volunteer campaigns. Number 3, you also give them a space to sort of plant some of those ideological seeds. You know, you can talk, we always like to have these little, it's tougher in the Zoom and phone bank era after a phone bank, I should say, in the COVID era. But, you know, when we did canvassing, we were always hanging out with people after, having like a big barbecue on Sundays. And it's an excellent place for someone whose most immediate political project is that, like, they hate Donald Trump, to have a, you know, talk to some people and develop a deeper understanding of what this project is. And then additionally, you know, once they start to, you know, become friends, join one of our orgs, you know, inviting them to our various political education events, right? Additionally, I would say there is a very important project, forgetting the recruitment aspect and the ideological development aspect. If we're going to talk about actually getting wins for working people, we're talking about how essential it is to get, you know, Medicare for all. I would say, like in New York, like thinking about how we could actually execute on the New York Health Act. Each of these candidates or issues that we're fighting for are in themselves goals. Like, we want to elect them, and generally there's a centerpiece to their campaigns. And Julia was certainly the renewal and strengthening of our rent laws. I think you see across, we have 7 candidates right now. We're rerunning Ocasio as an incumbent. We're rerunning Julia as an incumbent, but we have Zohran Mamdani is going to join running in Queens, Jabari Brisport in Brooklyn for the state Senate. We have Marcela Matinas for the Assembly in Brooklyn, Farah Souffrant in the Assembly for Brooklyn, and Stemelis Lopez, who's running for the House in the South Bronx. But it's very interesting to see how that we can encapsulate some of our issue-based campaigns and not just win on the merits of electing this person and having them lobby for it, but the extent to which, through persuasion or, let's say, even intimidation, other people within the body are forced to come around to some of our positions. So we have a group called the Eco Socialist Working Group. They partner a lot with Sunrise. they're in a citywide priority campaign for getting out what we call our public power campaign, and that is to essentially bring Con Edison under state control and make it, accountable to the people, right? To make it affordable for folks to stop doing these ridiculous, pretty racist distribution of who gets power and not decisions and overages, and then of course transition it to totally green energy. And the eco-socialist group was operating this in a context that was almost completely outside of the electoral working group. So we endorse our folks and we love them and we work for them and we want them to express, our wishes within the assembly and the state senate. But we were finding a number of people signing onto this, A, because everybody hates Con Edison, but B, because through Amazon and through even a campaign like Caban that you don't win, but you lose by like 55 votes, or Julia or Ocasio, or fighting for these rent laws, there does start to be a certain sense that it is even politically expedient to do, let's say, like the socialist thing, right? So in winning these campaigns, they can work as excellent vehicles for a lot of these issues where there's almost sort of like a blast radius around where you win, right? So like I would say, like if Semelis were to win in New York 15, I would be surprised if the way that she centered, for instance, public power or some of the adequate funding of public housing that we're fighting for, if anyone in the state assembly or state senate within her district or bordering it were not going to support those values after June 23rd this year. So it's another very interesting, sorry, actually, I missed the time thing. Am I over? No, good. Okay. So it's another very interesting thing. So again, I think the principal questions is how do you get folks who were involved in Bernie involved in a more ideological project, in a more organized project, such as our organizations can provide? We did the DSA-IE for Bernie to a large extent for that, so that could encapsulate a lot of our local fights. We could frame the New York Health Act as part of our canvassing. We could canvass for our local candidates, like the wonderful Zoran Mamdani, who I see now in the chat, or Marcela Medines, et cetera. But then also so that we could use these explicitly as recruitment mechanisms and as political education mechanisms with the people. Once you bring them in, of course, how can you develop them to the extent that they feel a ideological commitment to a broader thing than just hating incumbents, right? Because there's not a lot of, a lot of us hate incumbents, but that's not a project, right? That's just that's a feeling, right? So working them into that, and then of course, maybe winning some of these fights, be they ideologically or electoral, is a very interesting challenge. So I wanted to thank you all. Since there's just like 2 minutes left, I will just do a quick overview of anything if y'all ever wanted to work together that we've been prioritizing during COVID. Again, I said we got 7 candidates: Ocasio and Semelis Lopez in the House, Jabari Brisport and Julia Salazar in the State Senate, Zoran Mamdani, Marcela Medines, and Farah Soufrant in the Assembly. For those that are not always into doing explicitly electoral work, as I said, the Eco-Socialist group has been hard at work in passing this public power in coalition with groups like the Sunrise Kids, or the Sunrise Organization, as Bernie said, here in New York. Additionally, we've got some more ideological projects with our polyed, our reading groups, and our RPM radio show on WBAI, if you ever want to listen to it. Our immigration justice work has been working on a Free Them All campaign for everyone under incarceration from ICE during this time. And then also doing cross canvases with our candidates. So you can find like an immigration justice working group / Zoran Mamdani campaign where you can do a little bit of both that work. Our debt and finance working group has been hard at work in trying to do a backdoor public banking, which has been very hard to pass in other states, via a public Venmo, which we think we can do in a little bit quieter way, and then Trojan horse public banking into New York. And then finally, our anti-war working group is starting a campaign, especially during COVID, where a lot of people are going to be under economic distress, to stop the efficacy of high school recruitment. And of course, in a time like this, citywide, we have been working on many mutual aid projects via Queens DSA Mutual Aid. So very happy always, be it electoral or not. I mean, I've canvassed with a lot of you on past campaigns and seen a lot of you before. I always love when we do the mashups and take on Capitol. So happy to keep doing it. And thank you so much for giving me a chance to hang out here with you all today. I think I just made it in time. Is that 5 minutes? Nice.
Yeah, great timing. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your contributions. I want to echo how great it is to see familiar faces when we continue to work together, especially, you know, on the left. And, you know, learning lessons from past campaigns, you know, and bringing them back together to figure out how we can sort of strengthen to find not necessarily the answer, as you said, you know, you didn't have like the answer, you know, but finding, you know, potential solutions and strategies, and, you know, taking those lessons and going back into in struggles and into campaigns and testing those out. And that's like, you know, really what the work that we want to do to find out what really works. So thank you so much. I see that we have Zohran Mandani, who has joined us. Welcome. Thank you so much for calling in. We have you up next to speak. How would you like me to let you know about time? Shall I give you every 5?
Yeah, that would be fine. How much time would you like me to speak for?
We have a little bit of extra time in the agenda, so 15 to like 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, and I would love to also take some of that time to answer any questions that anyone has.
Sure.
So I'll speak for some of it, and then I'll open it up for some of it as well.
Sounds great. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you all so much for having me. I want to just echo something that Dan said, which is that it is great to have the mashups. And I've seen some of you here. I've just seen my man Sam King, who I went to college with. I thought it was a different Sam King on the line when I saw the name. This is quite the world. Yesterday I had a conversation with math teachers about kind of education policy, and then I found out that I was speaking to somebody who had taught me in high school. So this is a recurring theme that's happening. But I wanted to just say that this is really exciting to take some time to speak with all of you, because I think that it's going to require all of us to make the world that we want to live in a reality. And I'm so happy to be here with Socialist Alternative, and I can't wait to do more work with all of you in the course of these next 4 weeks until we have the election, but also beyond that. I wanted to take some time to kind of speak about Bernie and what Bernie has meant to me, and the kind of the potential of Bernie with regards to our campaign and electoral campaigns in general. So I only became a citizen about 2 years ago. So when Bernie first ran, I wasn't able to vote for him, but I did happily donate, because you can donate as a permanent resident. And I think that the reason I bring that up is just to talk about the unique nature of excitement around Bernie as a candidate, one that I hadn't seen, especially within communities that I belong to, specifically Muslim communities. There was a way in which that Bernie would speak about us that lended us the humanity that was typically not given to Muslims. So often you've seen Democratic politicians discuss Muslims as kind of, at our best, being able to prevent terrorism, and at our worst, creating and conducting terrorism. And Bernie would speak about us as human beings. And that is sadly, you know, something that was revolutionary for us to hear on a national stage. And he would extend that in his analysis somewhat of what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And I think that using that as an idea of, you know, as just to think about what avenues does Bernie open up for us as socialists, and what avenues does he open up for us in terms of getting people politically engaged that prior would not have thought about, you know, the efficacy of engaging in local or national politics. I can speak personally. You know, I began my organizing journey doing Palestinian solidarity work. It was something that has been very important to me for a long time in my life. But then in college, I co-founded our school's first ever Students for Justice in Palestine. And, you know, we did a whole campaign around BDS and the academic boycott. And when you do work like that, you typically do not think of any potential of ever getting involved in any kind of electoral endeavors in this country. And I think that the excitement of Bernie is that there's more and more room for people whose politics has been considered, quote unquote, too radical to engage in the struggles that we have here locally, but also nationally. And I think that, you know, I'm running for New York State Assembly here in Astoria, and you know, we have a strong DSA presence here in Astoria. You can sometimes fool yourself into thinking that, you know, everyone that would be willing to organize, you already know them through chapter meetings or through canvassing and whatever it may be. And Bernie running this year would show again and again the fallacy in thinking that, because I would go to different watch parties in Astoria and I would meet people who I'd never seen before at any meetings, at any canvasses, people who were just so excited about Bernie, but didn't have an understanding of kind of existing infrastructure around that was fighting for the same things, or local connections to the campaign, but for the first time felt this excitement that I like, akin to what I had felt in 2016. And I think that it provides us with this opportunity to really take people's political analysis to another level, where it isn't invested in an individual, but in a larger political ideology, and combating the same set of institutions that Bernie would talk about often, but extending that analysis to the local context. And Dan was saying this earlier, like, hating incumbents is not a project. It's more of a feeling. And I think that our job is to translate feelings into projects and make these into tangible long-term things that we can train people to do and get invested in. And I think that what makes it so easy for us to do so is that our platforms directly mirror what Bernie is fighting for on the national level. And for people who are invested in Bernie's campaign, the success of campaigns such as ours and issue campaigns such as the ones that Dan mentioned are critical to someone like Bernie ever succeeding on a national scale, because you cannot put forward a platform such as that and not have assistance at the local level across this country, because there's going to be so much of an obstacle to making any of that real. And so the parallels that I typically draw is that in our campaign, the top three issues that we talk about are housing, criminal justice, and public power. And these are all things that are directly tied to what Bernie was advocating for at the national level, right? Because we are, just like Bernie, pushing for a housing justice, platform, one that has a homes guarantee. Just like Bernie, we're pushing to end cash bail, and like he was the only candidate to say that every American citizen should have the right to vote, whether or not they're incarcerated or on parole. Similarly, we're pushing for that here in New York State, because still too many people are being disenfranchised because of that. And similarly, we're pushing against the power and the unchecked kind of nature of private capital with regards to utilities, and in general, really, but specifically with utilities. Here in Astoria, we produce about a quarter of New York City's energy. We're the top energy producing district in all of New York State. And we have an ability to lead on the issue of public power, of combating the climate crisis, by transforming these privately held utilities like Con Edison and National Grid and making them into publicly controlled and democratically controlled utilities, ones that do not exist to extract additional wealth from working class people across this state, but rather that exist to assist us in the full transition to renewable energy. So I think that those are, the issue parallels. And the last thing I wanted to bring up before kind of opening it up is that there is also, one of our campaign's core commitments is to radically expand the electorate here in Astoria. We have a very progressive electorate, one that voted for Cynthia Nixon by 14 points, voted for Tiffany Caban by 60 plus points, voted for AOC by about 40 points. But this is a very white electorate that we want to make more of a multiracial one that represents the entirety of this neighborhood. We did an analysis as a campaign of Muslim and South Asian turnout, and in the last primary, of the 4,455 Muslim Democrats registered in Astoria, only 7.7% came to the polls. Right? Only 9.4% of South Asians came to the polls. And this is also an opportunity for us to broaden the electorate, as well as the larger socialist community of people who are receptive to things. And frankly, the institutions that we are fighting against are ones that, because of racism, simply haven't had any interest in incorporating a lot of non-white communities. The fact that if I'm elected, I would be the first ever South Asian elected official in New York City speaks to the inability of these institutions to incorporate, so many people who have the same political ideology as them, but just do not look the same. And that leaves us with an unprecedented opportunity to talk to people about, why have you been excluded on the basis of race, and how is that tied in with the exclusion on the basis of class? And this is why our project is one that is the route that you should take in seeking liberation here in New York State and across this country. So I just wanted to kind of run through those issue parallels, the kind of political strategy parallels, the opportunity I think that we have here, and just kind of speak about that. While I am completely dissatisfied with the Democratic Party, I still see it here as one of the easiest ways for us to both reduce the harms that the state is producing for people across the state, as well as an opportunity to fundamentally restructure who the state serves and how it carries out its functions. So with that being said, I wanted to open it up to answer any and all questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of that, and particularly for the few details, more specific look on Astoria itself. I think, like, especially with Bernie, you know, the national conversation is so vibrant and exciting, but it's the local organizing that we want to focus on, of course. So thank you for that. We are going to open it up now, to discussions and questions from all of you. We're gonna sort of take stack. So if you want to come in on the discussion, throw your name, I think, into the chat, and make sure it goes to either me personally, privately, or in the everyone chat. Either one I think is okay for today. And I'll add your name to a stack and we'll kind of go through. I do have Alan is going to come in first, and then we'll go from there. So thank you so much, Alan. Whenever you're ready.
Oh, hi, Rhea, and hi to Zohran and all the friends and comrades. It's great to have the meeting in Queens, you know, and I want to remind everybody, I mean, Socialist Alternative, and you know, we've been involved in virtually every struggle in Queens, but also nationally, electorally, as well as building the movement. I mean, we've been involved in strikes, we've been involved in rent, on the issue of rent control and rent non-payment campaigns in the last period, and many struggles that working people face. I think that we have to. I think Algier was right to raise that. You know, how much the Sanders campaign activated and inspired hundreds of thousands of millions of people in terms of the movement that it generated. And it also has been, you know, it has played in that sense a positive role. But also, it should be said that unfortunately, when working people needed him the most, when with the onset of the crisis that descended on working people because of the crisis of the economy. I mean, there's millions and millions of unemployed now, working people, unemployed, facing evictions, facing all these movements. And I think that that was the moment when it was needed the most, as a socialist voice, as an alternative voice to the voices of Wall Street and the voices of capitalism, in terms of providing an alternative. Unfortunately, Sanders decided to throw his support behind Biden. And I think that's a very serious a mistake, and I think that that's a very serious problem that we have to deal with. I think that it is very unfortunate. I think that it is, and we need to discuss more seriously about how we're going to go forward. Why? The reason is because we've entered an absolutely extraordinary period of time at the present time. Working people, whether it is in our housing, our jobs, unemployment, mass unemployment, even in terms of the social life, and so on, we're faced with a series of attacks. And on top of that, there is an extremely dangerous right-wing conservative administration in the face of Donald Trump, which is threatening outright democratic rights, the attacks on immigrants, on working people, on minorities, and even taking away, is beginning to coalesce around. We can see that with right-wing armed protests and so on. I mean, creating a serious threat on democratic rights for working people. And I think that that is very real. I mean, the working people are faced with a series of threats and dangers and so on at the present time. And we should ask ourselves the question: is Biden or the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton and so on, is that any defense? Is that any real prospect that this? We have to remind ourselves that actually it was people like Biden and Hillary Clinton that opened the door in reality to Donald Trump, because they are so, in the eyes of working people, they're so indistinguishable, and so they're supporters of the status quo. They do not, they were the people who also at the forefront of creating the obstacles against Bernie Sanders becoming elected and so on. The Democratic Party and so on were at the forefront of that, which has generated, of course, the movement we've seen around the alternatives, alternative politics and so on. And I think that we can say with a very large degree of certainty that no confidence should be given to the Democratic Party establishment, which in no way has provided an alternative at the present time in terms of and what should we do? And I think Zohran and Dan and Algier, of course, explained that in many ways the key issue we have to do is that working people, we need to rebuild the socialist movement. We need to rebuild it here in Queens. We need to rebuild it in terms of building our organizations, the socialist and workers' organizations, running for alternatives, beginning to build a serious alternative nationally in terms of what we need to do, and no confidence in many ways to in terms of the Democratic Party providing any serious alternative, or even that will defend actually working people at the present time. We need to build toward a protest vote of some kind. But the most effective way to fight against Trump and Trumpism is going to be, ultimately, the need to rebuild workers' organizations and to rebuild the socialist ideas that can challenge and provide a serious alternative to the crisis that working people face because of the pandemic and the economic catastrophe that capitalism primarily. It's capitalism that's provoking this huge crisis at the present time that working people face. So we have to prepare ourselves. Yes, we have to prepare ourselves. We have to try to build more together here in Queens and citywide and nationally. In terms of the socialist forces and in terms of preparing working people, in terms of organizing to challenge the serious threats that working people face. Thank you, Ray, and thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much. Since we only have Zohran, you for till about 3 o'clock, I'm going to give you a chance to respond and give us some comments.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that we cannot have confidence in the Democratic establishment or the Democratic Party. And I think that what is so exciting to me about local politics is that we face far less of the challenges that Bernie faces on a national level. And I think that if we are to really have a dream of ever winning the presidency with a socialist, then we need to win multiple local battles across the country. And it's very important that when we do this kind of a thing, we can create more leverage for a future candidate like Bernie. But also, more importantly, to showcase to people across the country the bankruptcy of the party, both in a local setting as well as in a national setting. I think many of us are familiar with the national bankruptcy of the party in terms of, what the priorities are and what the limits are on the party's political imagination. But at the local level, we can kind of showcase, look at how this impacts you just in your day-to-day life. For example, I'm running against someone who's a 10-year incumbent, has never been primaried, came in to office with the support of the Queens County Democratic Party and is a member of this party. This is a party that is run by 3 lawyers from Long Island, Sweeney, Reich, and Bowles, who made hundreds of thousands of dollars prosecuting Queens County homeowners for foreclosure, representing the same big banks and servicers that I fight back against in my professional life as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor. After they got hundreds of thousands of dollars in that circuit, they then went on to the surrogates court where they made millions of dollars going after families who were too busy trying to survive in their lives to think about where their estates would go in their death. And the reason I point these things out is that these are the kind of same symptoms of decay that we see at a national level, but it's much closer to home and easier for people to understand and feel the impact of. And we have an unprecedented opportunity in local elections where we can win on a socialist vision and not have to contend with these kinds of, whether it's the obstacle of a large-scale corporate media or it's the obstacle of, the lack of kind of political infrastructure across much of the country that would support leftists. Here we can win these races, and we can do so by winning races. Sometimes in my race to win, we need 6,500 votes, right? In other races across Queens, you can win with 1,500, 2,000 votes. And this is all within the reach and within the grasp of an organization, both such as DSA as well as Socialist Alternative, because we are in a moment which is terrifying for its utter disregard for working people, and also one of immense potential in that the institutions which have extracted so much wealth from working people are paper tigers in many ways and can be combated with sustained organizational development and canvassing and, you know, practice of these different projects. So I think that it's a time that I think is really pregnant with potential, and I'm very, very excited to work with all of you, both obviously on our race. You know, we have an election in about a month, but more so on the long-term political project of winning socialist battles at the local level, going door to door to our neighbors and telling them, this is what we mean when we say socialism, and this is what we mean when we say establishment, and this is how we make the first thing happen and erase the second thing.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So I have next on the stack, I have Joe, if you want to come in for a question.
Surely. Thanks, Rhea. Yeah, this kind of stems from Daniel's contribution earlier when he was talking about the different kind of campaigns that we can work on and we have the potential to win right now. And it got me thinking that, like, you know, with all the talk about 2020, all the talk about, you know, should we support Biden, what's happening with the Sanders campaigns, like, are we missing out on opportunities to run campaigns for things like Medicare for All, which are particularly, like, people would love to win this right now, right? With the coronavirus coming in, just showing us how inefficient and horrible our healthcare system is, for the overwhelming public support of nurses and frontline workers. Like, are we missing an opportunity right now to start a campaign for Medicare for All and to start a campaign for winning other things like this? Because we're so distracted on the 2020 elections and so distracted on, you know, just the mainstream news cycle and things like that. And I think this is especially needed right now when you see, you know, the last candidate left is Biden. You see Warren stepping back from her Medicare for All stance, and you see the Bernie Sanders campaign having less and less of a role as far as mainstream politics goes. So I guess my question was, if we were to start up a real campaign for Medicare for All again, what would that look like on a local level in Queens and New York City, and how can we transfer that to a real victory?
Yeah, if I could comment on that, I think that again, to go back to the housing laws, like, it was a foregone conclusion that they were all going to expire and we weren't going to get them renewed at all, let alone strengthened. And we elected one unrepentant socialist to the state Senate. And then also, I think some people involved in DSA and other orgs, Make the Road and such, did support the no IDC folks who were admittedly taking out some folks who were caucusing with Republicans. I thought they ran as progressives, but they're sort of governing as social democrats, which I'm happy about. But you take those like 4 or 5 people, and then suddenly we had the capacity to not just renew the rent laws and strengthen them. I do believe, and I think if you ever want to talk, if you know, like Andrea again from Queens DSA, who's in the Echo Socialist group, the way that they've done public power in terms of pressuring electeds who are not just necessarily friends or whatever, but just going after anyone with constituencies who hate Con Edison and getting them to sign on to this project. I think the combination of, if June 23rd, some of these people win and it causes a few people to start worrying about their jobs, and then B, if, I don't know about Medicare for All because that's a very hard fight maybe nationally, New York Health Act, I think would be if somehow all 7 of these people won and there was to be run a New York Health Act style campaign a la Echo Socialist, where you go to everyone, every elected, forget, is it my friend, not, will you sign this pledge, will you publicly do it? And they're all fearing coming off the back of, say, these 7 folks getting elected or reelected. And even if they don't, you can still, you know, I think Austin DSA got, what's his name, Loud Doggett to sign on to Medicare for All with like a sustained 5-month constituent calling campaign. So it's possible even without these wins. But I do believe that in New York, I totally agree and think, I don't know about nationally, but I think that the New York Health Act at least could be, if we were to win these elections, a legitimate, serious fight an August, say this year, to like next June issue-based campaign that a lot of us should undertake together if we could. You know, DSA, Make the Road, New York Communities for Change, Socialist Alternative, whoever's down, and just really pressuring those electeds and getting them on the, it's interesting creative stuff. Like, I don't know if y'all saw in the housing one, not only did we canvass for it, not only did we elect people, but I think they wrote a bunch of postcards about eviction horror stories. And then the Housing Justice for All Coalition, and like found people in Albany and like dumped them on it. Like it was Miracle on 34th Street. I don't know if you've ever seen the end of that movie. And they're just dumping these postcards on assemblymen and women who were not down to vote for the housing laws. And like, well, what can I say now? You know, so I think, especially in this time, something around New York Health Act could certainly happen.
Thank you, Daniel, for popping in there. Next on stack, I have Leon. And then again, if anyone has any questions or wants to respond or comment or just a general thought, just type your name in the chat and I'll add you to stack.
Thanks. I think that there is sort of a fundamental question that is being posed, kind of underlying in this discussion, which is what would it actually take to win the things that we're talking about? And if we take, you know, let's say taking Con Ed into democratically public control, or winning, you know, Medicare for All in New York and things like that, or universal rent control and things like what would it actually take? I think if we discuss that question, we come into, we solve a lot of the questions that we're raising. And I think that, you know, I hate to make comparisons between different elected representatives and so on, but I do want to say that we do need to learn some stuff from the experience so far of two people. One is Shama Sawant in Seattle, our member, the council member in Seattle. And the other one, and I'm taking on a big one, is AOC. And while I don't like to make this comparison, there's obviously a huge difference between the seats and all of that. I think it is important to look at both of their terms. Shama is now in her third term, and see how different candidates are taking on these questions of how do we win these things that we're talking about. And I think that the first lesson is that the real battle begins after you win, and not before that. And we talk a lot about, you know, the canvassing, and Daniel is a very talented organizer. I heard him in Astoria in the Zor Mamdani's canvassing, and I have to say I've been to different like huddles and so on, and his was excellent. And in terms of like to winning the seats and so on, there's a lot of organizing which, you know, many people here are very experienced in, and there's a lot of debates, you know, run as a Democrat or not, and it's important debates. But the real problems begin if you actually win, and that's what we learned both from Shama and from Alexandria. The question of the program, and what I mean by program is not just your platform, but your methods. You know, how do you actually trying to win? What is your overall goal? You know, are you just trying to win, you know, nationalizing Con Ed? Or are you trying to build a real power for working people beyond that to fight for a fundamentally different society? What is you know, and I think that this is something that we've seen. Shama is coming in, you know, with the whole organization, with the whole program. This is what we're fighting for. You know, taxing Amazon is a small part of it. It's a massive task, but it's a small part of the whole program of what we're trying to fight for. And we've seen in Seattle. Seattle now has what many consider the most progressive city council in history, and yet almost all of them voted to repeal the Amazon tax, even though they're supposedly extremely progressive and all of that. And that's not because of their personalities. That is because of the framework that they chose to work through, which is the Democratic Party, blocked them and you know, put pressures on them and used all kind of things to make sure that they vote against the Amazon tax. That's why Shama and one other council member were the only ones that voted for it. And Shama is seen as the lead of that. That's just one example. And I do think that there's a question of local or, you know, presidential elections and all of that. I do think that it's easier to win local races than presidential elections, obviously. But what we've learned in November with Shama's campaign, you know, the last campaign, is that the local can very quickly become national when you pose enough danger, because the biggest corporation in this country has spent millions of dollars to outseat one socialist council member. The New York Times talked about it. The whole media, the whole political establishment tried to fight against that. So these questions of local is easier, and the media here is, if we pose enough of a danger, don't worry, the national media and big corporations and Biden and his friends and all of that will intervene here as well and make it a living hell for any candidate that poses a danger on their system. And then, of course, the question of an independent movement and organization that allow us the freedom to fight for something that goes against the interest of fundamentally of the Democratic Party, and not just the establishment, but the party as a whole, and the bosses that they represent and all of that. And I think just getting towards the end, all of those things that we're talking about is just to gain a relatively small amount of power and reforms, winning a seat, or even winning 10 seats, or winning, let's say 50 Congress people. It's a huge achievement. We're not there yet, but it's still not much. You used to have in history, in other countries, governments that were all, social democratic governments and all of that. They had full power and all of those things. So we're very far from that. But the task ahead of us is, I think everybody so far has agreed, is to fundamentally change society. So the discussion has to go from the reforms that we're talking about onto how do we fundamentally change society. And that's why I think that it's necessary to run as socialists, not for a pragmatic reason that would help us to win the race. Sometimes it makes it harder, but because that's what's actually necessary in order to win the society that we're fighting for. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Leon. Up next on Stack, I have Marty.
Hi, thanks, Rhea. And thanks to everybody for letting me sort of crash into your New York local meeting. I didn't realize it was going to be so targeted on local politics, but I just wanted to come in because I'm a nurse in Philadelphia. I've spent the last 6 weeks in a COVID ICU. It's not my usual job, but I kind of retrained to be able to go back to the ICU. It's been many years since I was there, but I saw the need and I went back. And I was surprised at myself how mad I was at Bernie for ditching when we needed him most, and just the absolute deafening silence from anyone about what the working class needed at that moment. So I wanted to pick up a little bit on this thread of the conversation about how to actually win something like Medicare for All, or at the state level, the national level, whatever it is. And to add the piece back in, and I know that there's a troubled history with the nursing unions in New York and with that campaign, but to just talk a little bit about the necessity of engaging the unions in these fights and how they can be a real core of strength and support. They have resources, they have the framework of an organizational structure, and not that they're perfect the way they are. We on the inside of those organizations have to do a lot of work to transform them and to bring in leadership that's really fighting for, in the nurses unions, not just nurses, but also our patients, and not just our patients in the hospital, but our patients broadly. That is, anyone that needs healthcare, preventative or otherwise, not just in the hospitals, because health is so much more than just being able to access the hospital. Fresh food, clean water, all these things that people were talking about. And I think the current crisis has really shown us, and will continue to show us, we've sort of, it's reminded us with a 2x4, that cities establish sanitation departments and sewage departments and water departments to deal with infectious diseases in the 19th century, right? And here it is back again, and cities and states are intending to push through all these austerity measures in just those places, like public health departments. And I know it's been a huge issue in New York about Medicaid cuts, exactly at that moment when we need water departments and sanitation departments and the public health department. So just to bring that in, that the unions, and particularly I think nursing unions, other healthcare workers unions in the fight for Medicare for All, that's an essential piece of the fight back, and how we could use a really robust campaign around Medicare for All to reach into these non-union facilities and to organize strong unions there that would then snowball the campaign for Medicare for all. And you could have this real synergy between like union organizing, campaign organizing, and really transform the union in the process, transform the fight back in the process to lift people's horizons about what is possible, and really to again reinforce there is no going back to that old normal. It's not even a possibility. It's not going to happen. First of all, it's not even on the cards. And the only way forward is to go forward and really use the openings that are in front of us now, and the degree to which the system's really been exposed in all its awfulness to a bigger, wider group of people, to not fight for just these like teeny tiny things, but to like go for the gold, because that's the only thing that's going to solve the problem. And I just think that's hopefully a lot clearer to a lot more people now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marty. We're thrilled that you crashed our New York Queens meeting. Thank you. Up next on Stack, I have Ryan, who can come in, and I think maybe for a discussion, I think maybe we'll give like about 6 minutes or so. So Ryan, please go ahead, and if anyone has any last minute thoughts or questions that they want to throw in, let me know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that like I definitely think it's really important, and I just want to back up those people who had said that we should concentrate on waging battles at the local and state level, whether it's like getting Zoran elected or like trying to get Medicare for all or public power in New York. Because like at the national level, it just seems like it's really hard to make a difference. Like I think the left doesn't really seem like they're capable of influencing Joe Biden at all. Like he's not going to budge on, his neoliberal positions on any issue, it seems. So I just wanted to say that. And yeah, I think it's most efficient to just focus on like winning elections where you only need like several thousand voters right now, than worrying about like the bigger picture of issues, even though they're really important. I just think that you can make more of a difference now on the smaller ones.
Thanks, Ryan. I have Cora on Stack next.
Yeah, so I'll try to be very brief. I mean, I think like one of the things that to me it's really frustrating is like it really seems that, we are giving by one side, but we are taking out from the other. Like thinking, for instance, on the rent laws that we won last year or the year before, time looks messy now. But anyway, like now we have this whole pandemic, right? And there is tons of people that cannot pay rent. And the reality, it's like a lot of people are going to be in a terrible situation. I was hearing yesterday, some news, how the Wall Street Journal was encouraging rich people to invest in housing. And since 2008, apparently like tons of houses have been bought by private equity firms, whatever, basically to speculate. The number of evictions have gone up. And it really seems that, like we want, and I was involved in the battle for the rent laws and against rezoning. And it's like, we put a lot of effort, and then, very quickly the whole system can throw us back to, bad place. I was gonna say a worse word, but anyway. And I think like it's the same thing with the pandemic. We are seeing it with the whole Medicare for all thing. Like now tons of hospitals are closing, doctors and nurses are being laid off in many places. It's like it really seems that it's really, that we have to put a lot of effort in winning very small things that then very quickly are really removed from us. And that's extremely frustrating. And I come from Spain. And, in Spain, we had like right now we have a left government, Social Democratic Party governing with Podemos, that it's like a new left force. And, like it seems clear to me that that's not enough. It's hardly enough. Like Madrid, that is the city where I come from, and Barcelona, in 2016, they both won the mayor, and they had the majority in Madrid, specifically the majority of the city council. And they did great things, things that, thank God, but very quickly, because they were forced to pay the debt and, many different things, the right wing very quickly come. And now we have, again, a right wing government that it's making, the whole pandemic in Madrid really unbearable. And I feel like, like what it's really paused in this time it's not only, you know, like we really need to get organized. And I really like what Marty was bringing, you know, the question of the unions and the question to really create structures where we can, in a long-term basis, be, you know, organized and fighting back. And really, instead of, you know, organizing a lot and win a little bit that then is being taken out, that we can, you know, start building up our level of organizations, which of course, you know, unions, I think it's a starting point. But I would argue that, you know, we need really broader organizations. I would argue a party, how there used to be back in the time, like the Labour Party, etc., where, you know, the communities, the neighbors, etc., can be organized on an ongoing basis and, you know, determine campaigns in which everyone can be involved, and we can link up the different issues. We can link up Medicare for all, we can link up housing, racism, and all these things, and really all fight together. And I think that that's really the question being posed to us right now, worldwide, I would argue. But yeah, I think specifically after Bernie, you know, it's really, really important. I'm just gonna stop.
Thank you, Cora, for coming in and stressing the importance of organizing on the local level and national, and how much it's needed and how important it is in terms of get the changes that we want, the sustainable, lasting changes that we want to see happen. I don't have anyone else on Stack, so I think we'll close the discussion. Thanks to everyone who came in. And we're going to scoot over to Joseph really quickly, who is a member of Socialist Alternative, and he's gonna tell y'all a little bit about our newspaper publication. So take it away, Joe.
Hey, recently we moved our paper to a digital format online that you can now get. Like many people during the coronavirus, we've had to kind of change our way of doing things. Normally we would have tables in our local areas and talk to people about our ideas or about the newspaper and organize that way. But unfortunately, we've had to move online. So it would be a great help if you're interested, if you could, you know, pay $2 and check out our newspaper. And really, you know, some of the things we talked about today about, you know, winning over policies locally and winning over the minds of people, you know, it starts with little things like discussing these kind of politics through our newspaper, through our tables. And you can check it out here. I'll put the link in the chat. And also, if you hate newspapers and don't want to check it out, I have another way for you to contribute and help us continue organizing. And you can go to socialistalternative.org/donate, which is also in the chat now, and contribute and help us, you know, reproduce ourselves and keep doing the good work that we talked about today. And that's my appeal. Please check out the newspaper. Please donate if you can. Also, don't forget to sign up on the Google Doc if you have attended. And if you're listening to me now, you have attended. So I'll put that there as well. And we'll reach out to you with upcoming events and campaigns and whatnot. Thanks, Rhea.
Cool, thanks, Joseph. So for the remaining time that we have, we're gonna let Daniel and Algier do a sum up to try and tie together all the ends of today's discussion. So we have a good amount of time. So Daniel and Algier, if you each want to take about 5 minutes to sort of conclude thoughts. Daniel, we'll have you go first.
Great, yeah. Again, first of all, thanks all. It's always fun hanging out with some fellow comrades on a weekend. It's actually raining out too, so I don't feel like I'm missing a lot. But yeah, I mean, again, it's beautiful to talk to you all and talk about some of the projects we can undertake together. I think to go back to something that Cora had said, I talked a little bit about the promise of these local campaigns, but I don't think it's necessarily saying that we shouldn't fight for broader, more expansive policies, either locally or nationally. I just think that, at least in the immediate, when transitioning off of Bernie, it's tactically like a great idea to get these people involved. And that it's not just about winning the local races, it is about building a movement of people, and the local races in the short term tactically are the best way to get those people. I certainly hope that let's say we win a few of these races or a few of these issue-based campaigns and get 100 new organizers into the fight, or like 50, pretty effective ones out of 100, or 200 occasional ones, whatever, we can then apply that to a broader, more national fight around abolishing ICE or Medicare for all or whatever, right? So just to put a little bit of a context there, is I don't think that we should become all sewer socialists and just fight for municipal reforms. I do think that coming off of Bernie, though, there is a certain cynicism among some of these people who are involved organizing for the first time, and getting them involved in something where they can win, where there are less structural opposition, be it in the media or the party or whatever. It gives them agency. It gives them a feeling of ability to change things. And then also just the intimacy of, I did a lot of Bernie stuff. It was fun, but it's a little bit different than going canvassing with a group of 8 people and you go out for beers after and you can talk to them about your favorite chapter of what is to be done or whatever, right? It's a different environment for bringing these people in and radicalizing them ideologically, but then also having the time to spend time with them and teach them about better organizing. So it's not necessarily a false dichotomy around local and national or global, but I think coming off of Bernie, I just think it's a good idea to try to plug people in, especially if that's their first experience and they hit this emotional peak at Nevada and then we're just let down and they feel like everything's fixed and everything sucks, to plug them into something where they can immediately feel that fulfillment of a win, be it just a little food delivery in a mutual aid program up to winning a state assembly race or changing the laws in New York. And in the process, you get to do this fun ideological and effectiveness as an organizer training. So I didn't want to make that, I just wanted to be clear, we got to change America and the world and everything too, right? But as like a tactical thing, I'm finding that giving folks that outlet over the next few months is great. And of course, the more of us doing it together, DSA, Socialist Alternative, tenants orgs, whatever, unions, when we can, get that ideological alignment, it's a beautiful thing. So thanks. I guess this is a great start. And again, I said a bunch of campaigns we have. The offer goes both ways. If you all have a priority campaign, if you ever want to reach out to Queens DSA about, we're here to jump on. We all, I think, have a lot of the same values. And when we organize together, we win, right? So that's my statement. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate you being here with us. Algier, take it away.
Yes. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. Yes, it is a very cloudy, rainy day. So even more important, why we could spend some time together and discuss some of these very central questions. Because I think as the discussion highlighted, the local, the regional, the national, international questions are not just questions unto themselves. They're all interlocked, right? So when we think of Amazon is in New York now. And we know that there are designs to really use this moment to really attack the New York working class, the New York poor, and the most oppressed. Redesigns on education, redesigns on healthcare, or the lack thereof. And so it's going to be very crucial and important for our movement, the socialist movement in particular, to reconnect the threads of our various struggles and our various social movements. And so the strategy and the approach that we develop, it's going to be very crucial. And I think today was a very good discussion because we were able to put some things on the table where there are some differences of opinion in the sense of how to approach these concrete questions. And I think certainly it is easier to run on the Democratic Party ballot line. But, you are going into a house of thieves and jackals. And we have to be mindful of that. I think what Leon pointed out was very instructive in the sense of the Tax Amazon campaign from a few years ago, the role of the Democratic Party, the so-called progressives, the Democratic Party. We want the 7 candidates to be elected and reelected here in New York. It's be absolutely vital. But that has to go even further than just being elected and reelected. How will they engage in concrete social organizing and movement building concretely? Right, to help to enforce whatever they bring forward in the state legislature or in the city council, right? Because we know that the struggle for reforms in this historical period will be difficult. And in fact, you would have to mount not just a local grassroots campaign, then we'll have to have national type of features to it to put the type of pressure on Governor Cuomo and the political and economic establishment. So the need for caucuses, actually, socialist caucuses, is absolutely vital, actually. Unfortunately, the DSA in Chicago, where a number of their members are in the city council, they have been unable to do that. Certainly, it's been difficult with the pandemic, but even before that, that has been very lackluster in the sense of how they are approaching fighting back against Mayor Lightfoot and the budget and so forth. Another key aspect to this, Cuomo and his proposed budget. This is an austerity budget. It's a war budget, basically. That's going to put this crisis on our backs. And we have to be very mindful of who we are dealing with at the moment. He has an 80% approval rating. And so we have to keep that in mind. And so it's even more important how we engage in our organizing, in our struggle. And this goes to the fact, unfortunately, Sanders has accepted this national unity approach by the Democratic Party establishment. And can we honestly, and I think Alan touched on this, can we honestly say that Biden will be able to deal with the economic crisis on one hand and the pandemic, then in fact interplays with each other concretely? I think not. And I think it was a mistake, actually, that AOC accepted, and many of the Sanders surrogates accepted to sit on a number of task force, because I think it undercuts the power that they could have actually in organizing independently outside the Democratic Party. I'm talking about Sarah Nelson, AOC, and many others. And I think that was very unfortunate. At the same time, when we think about a new political party, a new political formation, it's a project. It will not come overnight. It will take time. It will take struggle. It will take battles for that party. In fact, it will take even discussions and debates around, should we continue to run inside the Democratic Party as a vehicle to usher the things that we want and need? And that's a debate our movement, baby girl, has done her job. Will cut across that type of conversation. So the need to run to build a party, we should look at it that we need more independent candidacies of working people, of socialists running for office, because ultimately the Democratic Party establishment will go on the offensive, particularly when they feel like they are threatened by the very essence of those campaigns that speak in an independent tone, that talks about centers working people, people of color, the most oppressed, and the poor. And history has shown that the Democratic Party is the mortician, the grave digger, and the graveyard of all social movements. And this is what this Biden candidacy is really about. It's really to crush the Sanders momentum ultimately. And what's interesting, many of the Sanders supporters are fighting back and pushing back. So I would say that the building of a new workers' party is urgently needed, but even more so, and I'll stop right on this point. We want you to join Socialist Alternative. If you believe that you heard something today that was not just inspiring, but also has a vision about a new world, right? About highlighting the need for struggle and organizing on a day-to-day basis, then I would say join Socialist Alternative. We're part of an international organization called International Socialist Alternative, with 30 sections around the world doing the same type of work that we're doing here. Not just talking about a workers' party, but leading struggles on the ground, in the workplace, in the universities, and in our communities. So I hope you join us, check us out, and let's fight. Let's fight for a better world. Peace.
Great. Thank you so much, Algier. And Marty said that it's sunny in Philadelphia, so maybe that sun will make its way to us in New York. Let's hope so. Thank you all so much for joining the discussion. And again, in the chat, there's a few links that Joe threw up there. Socialist Alternative social media is in there as well. So check us out, and thank you again so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.